Hi, I'm Dean Ricci of Ricci's Landscape Management, and I'm here at our 502 Norbay facility, and I'm here to show you on the different types of pruning and what to prune. It is now the second week in June. We have all our spring blooming perennials and shrubs and trees are done with that cycle, and we're starting on the summer blooming. So it's very critical as to when we prune the plant. After it's done blooming is always a good rule of thumb. You don't want to prune before the plant blooms. So I'll take this Baptisia for example. This guy has just got through done blooming. You can see all the spent blooms. Right now they've got all these stems that's a little unsightly. We can, if the homeowner would like, we can snip these off. I'm using a pair of Felco hand pruners, which are perhaps the best. These stems that are kind of unsightly, you could snip those off. In the spring, we usually chop these down to the ground and then they re-emerge. So before our first bloom, before our first grass cutting, these things get chopped to the ground. That's pretty much the majority of the blooming for this plant. Here we have Amsonia. This guy is wrapping up his blooming. It's kind of grown into the Baptisia. I could like that look, so I wouldn't touch this. These things, once again, you knock those down in the spring. They have a good fall color, so you don't want to do anything to them until after they change their color in the fall. Our junipers, these are some pretty overgrown junipers. Junipers can be pruned at any time of the year. We can prune them in the spring, we can prune them in the summer, we can prune them in the fall. The thing with these guys is that when you prune them, you want to use your pruners or your loppers. And you want to go in, and to keep the natural look of this, where it has these out-branching arms, you want to go in here and you want to cut. You want to cut back. You see how much I took off? You really can't tell that I pruned it, but I'm moving it back. You don't want to take the head shears and shear them. This is a gas hedge trimmer. You do not want to use it for the junipers. No gas hedge trimmer on junipers. You want to use your pruners. Here we have Aronia, slow mound Aronia, or chokeberry, that the juniper is growing into. We want to find these branches and clip them out so that we give the Aronia more room to grow. And we basically, when we prune these, we're going into the plant at different levels. You just don't cut a line. You want it to branch out and look natural, and the way to do that is to adjust your cutting in and out of the plant. While you're doing the pruning and the bed maintenance, we also look at weeds, try to weed the bed. Stuff like this thistle in this Aronia, we want to make sure we pull that out. Guys always remember to get what's out in the open, but it's always the weeds that are in the plant that we need to watch out for. Here we have a weeping beech, purple leaf. You'll see some of the green where it's reverting. We want to prune this out. So this is normal. You'll have some of the plant revert, and when it does, you just cut that out. You'll see that same reversion in Wigelia, beech. There's also some of the different variegated like sedums or other perennials that you need to clip out what is reverted. And reversion is basically the beech this is its normal color. This is a cultivar. So they bred it to turn purple. So when we prune in June, the majority of our pruning is usually evergreens, like boxwood or yews. These guys, after the new growth flushes out and starts to harden, so it starts to turn the same color as the rest of the shrub, that's a great time to prune that. If you prune it while it's still flushing, you'll prune it 1 week and then you'll have to come back 2 weeks later and prune it again. So wait for the new growth to harden and turn color. This, we go ahead and we use our shears, or we want to use the hedge trimmer. It's okay to use this on these guys and use. So you want to go ahead, lay the tarp down. I'll show that in a different part of the video. And we go ahead and we shear the evergreens. That's probably the only time where you get to use this, other than a spring cleanup when you start chopping down perennials. This is not the everything tool. This is. The hardest thing about pruning is knowing what the plant is and when it blooms. This is a calicarpa, or beautyberry. This blooms in October. Gets pretty blue berries on it in the fall. Excellent fall interest. You do not want to cut this now. In the spring, you cut it down to the ground and it flushes out. This guy, we brought it down to within 3 inches of the ground, and look at it now. Don't prune it. A lot of guys will have the temptation, it's looking kind of shaggy, you want to leave it alone. Anything that you do to this now will be less of a bloom in the fall. Hydrangeas, as you know, they bloom in the summer and early fall. So you do not want to touch these guys. Leave them alone, let them grow. If there's a couple branches that are pretty wild, then obviously go ahead and snip them. This one's pretty good, but use your hand pruners. Do not use the gas hedge trimmer. But pretty much, these guys, leave them alone. Here we've got a Pinus parviflora. This is a Japanese white pine. This is a specimen plant, kind of abstract, asymmetrical look. You want to leave this guy alone. However, this one branch is drooping down. If I didn't have the pine cones, I probably would cut him back a little bit. But the natural growth habit of this guy is to be kind of branching out and irregular. Here we have more boxwoods. These would be great to prune with the gas hedge trimmer or the shears. Got them over here on the other side. And then we've got hibiscus, which we want to leave alone. These guys will bloom in late summer, early fall. Leave those guys alone. Here's some more hibiscus. These are, I think, perfect storm. And we have more hydrangeas. Here, the salvia, they're in full bloom. We want to leave these alone. But in about 4 weeks, when these blooms are done, we're going to cut these back to the ground so that they reflush. Grasses, we leave alone. Don't touch those. Their fall interest, summer, this one's a little ahead of schedule, but it's blooming, starting to bloom now. We leave our grasses alone, we cut them back in March. Nepeta, once again, these guys are in full bloom like the salvia. When they're done, we will chop those down. This is Calamentha. Excellent pollinator. It is a rebloomer. It's going to start blooming in about a week or two, and once it starts blooming, it'll bloom the rest of the summer into the fall. What we could do on some of these, because once they get mature, they get fairly large, in May we can go through and chop them back again, and that'll keep them short and compact. That's a very important practice for older landscapes where you have perennials that are there for more than 3 or 4 years. They get mature, chop them back during the growing season, and then they'll re-push out, but in a more compact state. Penstemon, this is still blooming. I wouldn't touch that now. In 3-4 weeks, when the salvia and the nepeta are done, I would go ahead, bring those back and just cut some of the stems off. The plant itself will turn a little more burgundy, and I would just leave it alone. Here we have some more Calamentha. Once again, we can let that be. In May, if this gets to be too big this year, next May we'll go through and we'll chop this down in half after it pushes. Okay, so here we have some coral drift roses. These guys are very durable. You can see the pollinators. It is a rebloomer. You leave this alone. You don't want to touch it. If there's a branch that's coming out like this guy, I'm going to snip him, but that's it. I would leave those alone. Don't touch them. This is Angelina sedum. This is the bloom. It's not much of a bloomer. It does bloom yellow, but when these yellow blooms are done, we're going to go through and we're going to cut those back. And that's going to increase the growth to have it fill in some of the bare spots. The blooms actually are kind of unsightly after they're done. This plant's used more for foliage. So we've got here some Weigela. These guys are some of the last ones to push out in the spring. It usually doesn't start pushing out till about the first week of May. We always get calls that last week of April saying they've got dead shrubs. Most of the time they're Weigela. It's like give them another week or two, they'll push out. They're spring bloomer, so they're going to bloom in probably, this spring was a little bit different, but I think they're going to start blooming in about 2 or 3 weeks. You'll see a lot of this dead. You can clip this off now, but I would wait until after it's done blooming, and then you can use the hedge trimmer on these if you'd like. This guy right here has got quite a bit of dead. So what I would do is just go through and cut out the dead branches. This poor guy got beat up this winter. And so what we're doing is we're just gonna take some of this dead out, see how he does. Hopefully it'll incite more growth. Keep in mind, wherever you prune, that's where the new growth is gonna come out. So if you're pruning out dead, prune it back to where it's alive again, and that's where the new growth is going to push out of the plant. Going back to this Pinus parviflora, you see these beautiful pine cones? These guys are pretty weighty, and so they'll weight down a branch. Here we've got this runner. I'm actually going to clip this back to here. It's kind of an oddball deal. You don't want to shape this, but some of the real wild branches, it doesn't hurt to cut it. This Amsonia is on its last last hurrah for the blooms. I am going to pull some of the weeds out here. And it's kind of growing into the salvia, into the coreopsis. That's kind of cool. I like that look. That's called communal planting. This guy will eventually take over the bed if we don't keep it in check. So in the spring or in the fall, we'll cut some of this back and separate the salvia and the coreopsis from the ansonia. Right now, after this bloom is done, so maybe in the next week or two, about the same time the salvia will be done, we'll go through and we can clip some of these if they're kind of unsightly. Typically though, people will leave this alone. The blooms, the blossoms are not too offensive, so you could just let it be and they'll fall off in due time. Coral bells, we use a lot of coral bells in our landscapes. They do bloom. People are like, oh, they bloom? Yes, they bloom, but this is it. Not much here. When they're done blooming, you can kind of see this one turning pink right now, and then these turn pink and then white, and then they're done. When they're done, we'll go through and we'll cut these stems off so that you just have the plant itself. I want to leave the rest of these on so they can finish out. Once again, always pull the weeds. The seasonal visit of pruning includes things that we just don't prune, like the weeding and the cleanup, and then also the light adjustment. So these like uplights, we want to make sure that they're pointed in the right direction. Or these downlights, we want to make sure they're pointed in the right direction. Stuff like pathway lights should be cleaned off, free of the bird debris, and it's part of the whole package. Make sure the pathway lights are straight, cleaned off, make sure that the lights are aiming in the right place, everything's working. The crew should also test out the lights, make sure all the bulbs are good to go. Here we have a Japanese cut leaf maple. This guy is in pretty good shape. I'm looking for dead wood. I'm looking for branches that don't belong, like something that outreaches out and looks odd. We want to go through, look for dead wood. That's why these are the choice tool to use when you prune. No hedge trimmer. I want to just clip some of the dead wood out. We're not going to do a lot of thinning because it is summer. In the fall, after it drops its leaves and it shows its fall color, we'll go through and we'll do structural pruning, and you'll see that in my video in November. But right now, we're just looking at taking out the dead wood and anything that looks out of place. So here we got two different types of hydrangeas. We have Incredible, which is an arbutus hydrangea, and we have an oak leaf hydrangea, which is Hydrangea quercifolia. You can see these guys are getting ready to push. This one's a little bit ahead of the curve. It's not supposed to be blooming until a little bit later in the year, but once again, it's already setting up its buds and it's getting ready to explode with flowers. This guy, same thing. It's going to be covered with these large poofy flowers. We don't want to touch this. If there's any dead wood anywhere on any plant, of course you could take that off at any time. But for any sort of structural pruning or shearing or anything like that, absolutely not. Just let these guys be. If they're outgrowing an area, then I would just snip here and there to get it confined in a certain space. But that goes back to the initial install. If it's a good design and the plants are laid out properly, you won't have to shape or shear or prune to keep it at a certain size because it'll be properly placed. Another Weigela, like a Java Red. This guy is had some damage done to it the previous year. It's supposed to be up a little bit taller, but it's blooming right now. We want to leave this guy alone. So here we have a viburnum. It hasn't quite set its buds yet for blooming. It will be blooming probably in the next 4 to 6 weeks. We're going to leave this guy alone. If we have to cut anything off of it, we're going to cut anything that it looks out of place again, or any dead wood. In late March when we did our original video, this guy was massive. He was about as high as the fence, maybe a little bit taller. We cut him way back, and look at him now. He's about 4.5, pushing 5 foot, and that's in just 3 months' time. So everyone's afraid to prune, afraid about hurting the plant. Absolutely not. It's sometimes better for the plant if you chop it all back and then let it flush up new. Come the fall, this will be a new plant. Okay, so I'm here looking at a boulevard cypress and a 9-bark. These are two good examples of a plant that, one, obviously you can't clean this up enough to make it look good. So I would actually remove this plant and plant something else. You will always run into a situation where if you're dealing with a more mature landscape, you will have to make that decision and definitely confer with the homeowner on that. But like in this case, the boulevard cypress, beautiful plant when it's small. As it gets bigger, you can see all the dead in here, and now it's only the tips that are green. I'm not going to spend 2 or 3 days cleaning this up. I think we should just remove this and plant something new. Now, when you get to something smaller, like a 9-bark here, this guy's getting ready to bloom, but you can see all this dead growth, all this dead wood. I would still try and go through and cut this dead wood out. Now, there's not going to be much left of the plant, but at least it'll be green and not dead. Some of this stuff will just break off. Well, this poor guy looks a little bit better. It still has some more pruning to go, but I'm going to wait until these bloom, and then I want to probably cut this branch back, cut this guy off. Of course, he's blooming really good, and then cut this back. So the plant itself will be about this big. It's a 2-stage process. You can't do pruning all in one shot in any scenario. Pruning is a process. We have a U, which we can use our hedge trimmers and shear that. You can also use the hand shears as well. This is a weeping cherry. What I would do here is cut some of the ones off at the base so it's not dragging on the ground. Some clients have us prune this up so it looks like an umbrella. This is meant to just be cascading. In the fall, when the leaves are off and we're able to see the branches, we might have to prune some of the larger branches off to keep it in check. Once again, proper plant placement is key. And then over here, the 9-barks did not do that well, but I would just remove this guy and not replace it because the weeping cherry's in the way. We have one on the other side that didn't make it as well. All right, and then we have our specialty conifers. These guys, this is like a bird's nest spruce, but it's a condensed version. You might see some dead in there. I would just kind of clip some of that out. These guys you leave alone. You don't shear them, you just take these and prune some of the dead off. Sometimes you can just pinch the dead needles off and leave the branching, and it would come back. Not all the time, but sometimes. Depends on the severity of the patch. Here's a little dwarf hemlock. This guy, I don't even see anything wrong with this. This has been here for probably 10, 12 years, and this is how big it is. I don't see any dead branches, so I'm going to leave it alone. So buckthorn. People are like, well, can you trim my buckthorn? It's like, well, not really. You want to let that be. If you do anything to it, do it in the fall. And once again, kind of like the weeping cherry, if you got to bring it in for size, then use your pruners and do some structural pruning on the branches. This guy is not meant to be sheared. He's not meant to, you don't want to cut him down to the ground. Basically go through, cut some of the branches off in the fall to keep it in tight if you'd like. If not, just let it be. And you can notice all the roses are doing really well. They're full of blooms. You don't want to prune them. However, this one's got some deadwood that I'm removing, because you can remove deadwood at any time. It's not going to hurt the plant. So I'm taking some of these branches out that we thought were going to come back this spring, but did not. Obviously, anything dead on a rose this time of year needs to be out. And of course, it's always fun to prune roses when you're not wearing gloves. Those thorns hurt. So I kind of cleaned that guy up. I always look at the leaves, because once in a while, like this guy, you notice how this plant has got a weed in it. So we want to try and want to do our best to pull it. I missed the root on that. Sometimes you got to go underneath. This is actually choker vine. So with this rose, we see something, these bugs are eating it. We would like to dust the roses. That is not typical for the new type of roses that we're using. They're definitely bug resistant. We also, when we fertilize this in March, we use a fertilizer with a systemic insecticide combined with it. So that insecticide gets absorbed up through the plant so that it keeps the bugs away. This guy, what I would do here is probably dust it and let it be. So here we have a weeping spruce. This guy looks great. All the new growth flushed out. I don't see any dead on it. See a little bit of yellowing. I'm not too concerned about that. But this guy is pretty healthy. I wouldn't touch it. Here we have columnar privet. This is not a very common plant. We used that for a few years, thinking that would be a good hedge. It is blooming right now. We're not going to touch them. Once again, though, maybe these lower branches, I would probably go ahead and clip them because I don't like the shape of this. So just kind of shape that up a little bit. Here we have a hydrangea tree. See some deadwood here. Gonna kind of clip that off. Once again, we don't want to leave this guy alone. He's going to be pushing out blooms in the next 2-3 weeks. We did a very hard shearing on him, so he's going to be extended maybe a little bit later. So maybe 4 weeks when we'll start to see blooms. But we did knock him back quite a bit this spring. So now we're at our 501 facility across the street, and this whole landscape, all you need to prune, for the most part, are a pair of these. Hydrangeas, we leave them alone. Hibiscus, we're going to leave those alone. They bloom in the summer. This is a columnar oak. This guy looks good. I don't see any dead branches. We're going to leave him alone. We got some grasses that we're going to dig out in the fall. That if these guys don't respond better, we'll probably dig those out. Once again, more hydrangeas, Weigela, another Weigela. Leave these guys alone. Because of the spacing, I want this guy to get big, so we probably won't even touch this for at least a few years. Any dead branches on it, of course, we'll prune out. We've got stuff like lavender here. This guy, now after we see everything bloom, I'll probably clip some of this dead off Lavender will die out in sections as it gets older. This is not uncommon. You just got to prune it out and it'll come back. Lavender's pretty prolific, so don't be afraid to get in there and get on it and chop stuff out. Sedum, that's a fall bloomer. You can see all the buds for the blossoms. They're going to be coming out soon. Once again, more Wigelia. Now I'd like to talk about these guys. This is Sambucus or inkberry. This is golden lace. They have a purple version of this as well. But I've noticed on some of these plants, you might have a branch that totally dies out for no reason. We want to go ahead, just cut that out. We don't need that in there. Keep the bush looking good. These guys will grow, you let them be. Just prune the dead out. In the spring, if we think they need to be cut back because of their size, then we'll go ahead and we'll knock them down in the spring before the first mow. So we're talking late March. Now you have perennials like allium. You leave these guys alone, they'll be blooming probably in about 2-3 weeks. More hydrangea, more Wigelia. Here we have this columnar oak. Got a dead branch here. Take that out. And when we cut these, like this one's got the branches up here at the top that are dead, just snip those off. You don't have to take the whole thing off. If it's got growth on it, stop where the growth starts. This guy needs a little more clipping here, but you get the idea. We want to go through any of the dead wood, clip it. Once again, adjust the lights. This light's supposed to shine up on this guy. This is actually not a columnar oak. This is a sycamore. The last one was a sycamore too. Okay, we did an experiment last fall after the blooms were done, or after late summer on this lavender, and the guys went through and they sheared off all the spent blooms and left this pillowy foliage around the landscape. Wanted to see how that responded this year, so we didn't cut this back in the spring, but you can see our experiment failed. We thought maybe this can come back. It did not. We need to come back in the spring because of how much is here, and we'll cut it all back down to the ground. So we have another maple. This is actually a crossbreed between a red sunset and a Japanese maple. So it's like they call it a Korean maple. This guy is very durable. Time to prune them is in the fall after the foliage is off, but if some of the branches are hanging too low and I wanted to see more of the trunk, I can prune it up a little bit. You really can't hurt this guy, but whatever you do, do not shear it with the gas shears. Use your pruners. So we have some gold striped junipers. Once again, it's a juniper. You really can't hurt it too much. This guy is struggling. It's got a little bit of dead in here. I would just pull out the dead or clip out the dead. Not too much going on, but we have one over here. We did have a third one, but I think when they worked on the utilities, they took it out. But these guys, once again, use your pruners, prune out the dead. The purple leaf version of the Sambucus, of the golden lace, this is Dark Towers. This guy's got a purple leaf. You can see the bloom on it. This guy's a little premature, but it's going to be blooming in the next couple of weeks. We got another one over here. These guys, leave them alone. If there's anything wild growing out on a branch, go ahead and snip it with your hand pruners. But for the most part, we leave these guys alone. We'll chop them down in March when we do the spring cleanup. Here we have a Cushion Valley Mugo Pine. These guys, the new growth is already pushed out and is already hardened. They're very slow growers. This plant will only get about 4 feet wide and about 1.5 feet, 2 feet tall. So it's probably at 60–70% mature size. This guy, I would not touch him. If there's any dead candles, I would prune those off. If there's any dead branches, prune them back to where there's live growth. But for the most part, you leave this alone. So while we're here, I want to show you, this is a fungus. This is from, it looks like almost like dog puke. That is actually a fungus that is feeding off the decomposing wood bark that we're using. It is very temporary. People are like, oh, we got to treat the mulch because I don't want this fungus to spread. However, it's only because of high humidity or the moisture content's just right and the heat is just right to get these conditions to grow this. As soon as one of those conditions change, that fungus will leave. So I always tell people, if it's unsightly, just take a pitchfork, remove it. You do not have to treat the whole mulched area for that. So here we are. This is our RLM parking lot. And this whole strip of planter bed that's only about 4 feet wide is filled with perennials. It blooms different times of the year. The only thing we have to do with this is pull the weeds, and if anything's dead, we dig it out. In the spring, we chop down everything, remulch it, fertilize it, and it's good to go for the season. This is designed to be a low maintenance landscape. As many plants as you see here, you do hardly anything to it throughout the summer. You don't have to prune things, you don't have to, it's not designed for watering. This is a very sustainable landscape. We do weed it. If there's any garbage, obviously we pull that out. And if there's anything that dies by chance, then we dig it out. This is a good example of communal planting. Communal meaning they share the same bed and they just share the same space. So there's very little room for weeds to grow in there. This is very low maintenance. It's got kind of a cool look. The Amsonia is pillowing over. The grasses will be good fall interest. We have spring interest with the Amsonia. We have the dark towers for the summer color. We have allium here for summer color as well. The Baptisia just finished up, so we can go through and clip that if we wanted to. I don't care. I don't mind seeing that. But some clients insist on a manicured look, so we'll go ahead and clip it. But for the most part, we let this be. So to conclude this session, there's some things that when we're pruning, we don't have to touch. In this bed, we have Amsonia, Calamintha, allium, different types of ornamental grasses, Baptisia, Echinacea, Rudbeckia. All these guys are designed to be left alone. In nature, no one prunes them. In our landscape, no one needs to touch them. Weed, clean out garbage, and then obviously remove any dead wood or dead plants. When it comes to some of the shrubs or herbaceous perennials, we need to prune. These guys are our #1 tool, the hand pruners, not the gas hedge trimmer. Gas hedge trimmers, you only use that on a few plants, you use them on cleanups, but other than that, not everything has to be sheared into balls. We need to look at each individual plant, realize when it blooms, so we know when to prune it, and then what to prune on it, because not everything gets shaped as a wall. Thank you for joining me. I'm Ricci.